Good morning, everyone. For those of you on the Eastern time zone, we know that we have participants that are across the world, across the globe, and we welcome you to the Space Education and Strategic Applications Conference and our opening keynote with Colonel Eileen Collins. Colonel Collins is the first woman to pilot and command an American spacecraft. Eileen Collins has led an inspiring life of adventure, leadership, and achievement. As a child, Collins dreamed of becoming a pilot. Her parents nurtured her dream, often taking her to Elmira Soaring Field to watch gliders take flight. Reading every book she could on aviation, Collins began saving up money for flying lessons at the age of 16. After graduating from Syracuse University, Collins entered the Air Force undergraduate pilot training program. In 1990, she was selected for NASA's astronaut program, and in February 1995, on the STS-63 Discovery mission, she became the first woman to ever pilot a space shuttle. She piloted STS-84 Atlantis in May 1997, and in July 1999, she achieved another milestone when she became the first woman ever to command a shuttle mission, the STS-93 Columbia. After flying one final NASA mission in July 2005, as commander of STS-114 Discovery, Colonel Collins retired. Now that she's realized her dreams of being both a pilot and an astronaut, Collins has a new dream: that someday people will discover new ways to fly higher, faster, and further, and that someday we will travel beyond our solar system. Recognized as one of America's most admired women, she now shares her experiences as a test pilot, astronaut, and spaceflight commander with audiences around the world, like this venue. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Colonel Eileen Collins.
Thank you. Very much for that nice introduction. That was really great. Dr. Vernon Smith and all of you, thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. And I thought what I would do in light of everything that's going on in the space program today and how it's expanding outside of governments into private industry and the commercial side, and so many more people are becoming involved in space. And I thought I would talk about leadership and many of the lessons that I learned throughout my career in the space program in a high-risk organization, and not only applies to leadership, but also applies to teamwork and growing your industry in flying successful flights. And I thought the best way to do that would be to tell you a story. And as I look back over my career, the I would have to say, unfortunately, a tragic accident that happened at NASA also turned into a huge learning experience for all of us in how we should fly in space and how we should do it safely, not only from the technical point of view, but also from the people point of view. So I'm going to tell you a story about my last flight in space. It was my 4th space shuttle flight, and it was February 1st of 2003. Now, on that day, my crew was 5 weeks from launch, and the mission was STS-114, and our goal was to fly to the International Space Station and carry a crew exchange. We were taking up 3 crew members and bringing home 3 crew members, and we were taking up 5,000 pounds of gear for them, science experiments, water, supplies, and then bringing home things they didn't need anymore. So it was a pretty, I want to say, routine as things could be. It was a pretty routine mission. And that was scheduled for March of 2003. But the date that I'm going to talk about was the date that we lost the Columbia space shuttle. And that was on February 1st of 2003. The crew had been up in space on the shuttle Columbia for 2 weeks. February 1st was the return to Earth day. So we were all excited, of course, to see the shuttle come home, but also my crew was going to become the prime crew, and we were the next to fly. So we had been working hard, we had been studying, we'd been doing simulators, we were excited, and we were ready to go. We just had to wait for our shuttle to be ready. Well, that day on February 1st was a Saturday, and I was home. It was not a work day. My son was 2 years old. I woke him up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we were sitting in the living room at home, and we thought we'd turn on NASA TV and watch the space shuttle land. So, I was explaining to my 2-year-old as much as he could understand, what the space shuttle looks like. This is what Mom's going to be doing next month. And the crew did the deorbit burn. Everything went fine. In fact, the mission had been perfect for 2 weeks. People didn't even know there was a space shuttle in space because everything had been going so well. Well, after the deorbit burn, the crew coming home re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, and they stopped answering the radio calls from Mission Control. And Mission Control was calling Columbia Comcheck. Columbia, how do you read? And there was no answer. So I knew something was wrong. And then when the radar controller in Florida said that he did not have a radar return on the space shuttle, I knew something was terribly wrong. So I started changing channels, and I came to a major news station, and what I saw was just horrifying. You could see the burning debris across the East Texas sky. We lost the shuttle Columbia. It broke up on re-entry, and 7 astronauts gone, 7 friends of ours gone. What could have caused that tragic accident? We didn't have any idea that anything was wrong. So NASA has a plan in case there's an accident. They've got people already selected to be on an accident board. So those people were notified that day, and they went to work immediately. And over the next several weeks and months, they slowly discovered the cause of the accident. So the reason the space shuttle broke up was they discovered there was a hole in the wing. On the left side of the wing, it was a little bit below the leading edge of the wing where the crew could not see it. So no one knew that, no one ever saw it. No one knew there was a hole there. But when the shuttle re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, we accelerate, well, we actually decelerate to Mach 25, which is 25 times the speed of sound. It's so fast that you heat up to almost 3,000 degrees on the outside of the shuttle. And that's why you need a heat shield. So our heat shield is made of tiles in something called RCC, reinforced carbon-carbon. Well, the hole was in the RCC, and that hot gas plasma got into the wing, and it melted the aluminum, and the wing broke off, and the shuttle tumbled out of control, and it broke up. And that was the physical cause of the accident. Now, how did that hole get there? I'm going to talk about that later, but briefly, the hole got there 2 weeks earlier on launch. A piece of foam about maybe 2 feet long, and it weighed less than 2 pounds. And it's foam like you would have in a cooler, for example, just very, very lightweight foam. It fell off the fuel tank and it hit the wing of the shuttle about 1.5 minutes into the launch. So I'm going to say more on that later. But the interesting thing here is the accident board, of course, they blamed the accident on the physical cause, which was the hole in the wing. But the interesting thing is that they also blamed the culture at NASA, which was a shock to me because I thought I worked in the best culture in the world. You know, I worked here at a great place with a great mission. People got along with each other. Everyone was very excited and put all their energy into the shuttle missions. And people really believed in what they were doing. So I was surprised that the accident board blamed the culture. I thought, what's wrong with our culture? Well, I'm going to tell you, looking back, every organization has culture problems. It's just that we need to recognize them and try to do our mission as best we can and keep our culture issues under control and focused on the mission. So what I'm going to do is talk about leadership and the leadership that we had at NASA and the Space Shuttle program in the sense of a risky mission. So we are an organization that takes risks and we have very difficult challenges and we do many things for the first time. So after the accident, NASA took on a huge challenge. Basically, what we were doing in the Space Shuttle program was first, to fix the problems that caused the accident. Secondly, get the shuttle flying again as soon as safely possible. And that was to be my crew's mission. The third was to finish building the space station, which at the time was a little over halfway built. And then finally replace the shuttle with the next generation launch vehicle. And that's where we are today, and more on that later. But my crew was asked to stay and fly our mission. And for the next 2.5 years, we gradually learned more and more about the accident and what happened. So what worked? What did I learn? So I'm going to talk about leadership a little bit in the sense of types of flawed thinking. And before I get into that, since I know we have people here who've been through leadership classes many times before, I'm just going to mention that these basic principles of leadership are still important, but I'm not going to go into depth at talking about them. The basic principles of leadership, as you all know, are knowledge of your job, working well with people, and integrity. And I think in the Space Shuttle program, we did all three of those very well. We weren't perfect, but we did them well. You know, knowledge of your job, you know, we all know that you know, what we know can save our life. So we study, we do simulators, we practice, and we try to compete with each other on who knows more about the mission and the scenarios. The other one is working well with people and communicating well, knowing the people that you work with, not just their names, but knowing their jobs, their interests, and maybe they have issues in their personal life, maybe they have issues at home, kind of understanding that and making sure that we work together as a team and keep our team members on board. And then the third one is integrity. And we all think of integrity as honesty, but I think it's more than that. It's not only being honest with people, but it's knowing that you're going to be honest with them and they're going to be honest with you in the future. It has to do with expectations. So I just briefly wanted to mention those three classic principles of leadership: knowledge of your job, working well with people, and integrity. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on those because, again, I suspect that most of you have had quite a bit of leadership training on those in the past. But I want to try to go one step further and talk about applications. So the accident, you might be asking, so how did that hole get in the wing of the space shuttle? So let's go back to the day of launch, which was January 16th. So NASA has cameras all around the launch pad, and these cameras are engineering cameras. And after the launch, the engineers will review all the video and look for anything unusual that might have happened. And that's standard procedure. So the day Columbia launched, at 81 seconds, this piece of foam fell off the fuel tank. And the engineers saw that just hours after the launch. The foam came down and it hit the wing of the shuttle, but the camera angle was such that they didn't actually see the impact, but they saw that it hit the other side of the wing. And out from the bottom of the wing came this debris. So the engineers said, well, that doesn't look good. We need to get pictures. Well, the crew did not have an angle where they could see that part of the wing. So the NASA engineers asked US Space Command if they would turn their satellites towards the shuttle and photograph that section of the wing to see if there was damage. And the Air Force responded. The paperwork went in. They started, I don't know what they do to get these photos or how it works, but they were very responsive and were ready to do that. But when the word got up the chain of command at NASA called off the pictures, and they called the Air Force and said, stop, don't do this. And that was due to I'm going to say a variety of communication mix-ups, organizational mix-ups, who's in charge of what. There were misunderstandings. And that's why the request was withdrawn. But there's more. Now, had we known there was a hole in the wing, we could have, in hindsight, we could have flown a rescue mission. We could have saved the 7 astronauts. And it was determined after the fact that we could have launched Atlantis. In fact, Atlantis that was my shuttle. It was already stacked. It was ready to roll out to the launch pad. And Atlantis could have been launched in the same orbit of Columbia. The 2 shuttles could have gone bay to bay. And the Atlantis crew, which would have been the crew that had previously flown, it wouldn't have been my crew, but a previously flown crew that had all their, they were just ready to go. They could have taken some spacesuits over to Columbia. And then the Columbia crew could have put on their, we call them EVA, extravehicular activity suits, their spacesuits, and they could have gone over to Atlantis and come home safely on the shuttle Atlantis. We couldn't have saved the actual shuttle Columbia immediately. Maybe down the road we might have been able to, but we had to get those astronauts home. I believe that mission would have been successful had we attempted to fly it. I also believe that it would have riveted every person on this planet watching the rescue taking place in space. And I think it would have been greater than the Apollo 13 rescue mission. But it never happened. And the accident board blamed all of this on what they called missed opportunities and faults in the organizational culture. In fact, they even define culture. And I won't go into the entire definition that they had of culture, but they blamed it on, well, they said culture is the way we do things here. And that just didn't work with the NASA leadership at the time. So what were some of the types of flawed thinking? So I pulled up about 5 of these. You can, if you're interested, you can always read the accident report. It's online. It's on the NASA website. And chapter 6 of the accident report goes over a lot of these. But I'm just going to pull out 5 types of flawed thinking. And although these apply to the accident, this type of thinking applies to the way we do our jobs every day and the way we live our lives every day. And maybe we need to think a little bit more creatively. So the first one was the expert in the space shuttle's heat shield said to me, a lightweight piece of foam cannot damage the heat shield. He said, it's impossible for a piece of foam to do this. Well, that was proven wrong later in a test that was run out at Southwest Research Institute. They fired a piece of foam at a shuttle wing and they blew a hole in it. And they set up this test very similar to the way the launch conditions would be. And we determined that although it's a very lightweight piece of foam, if it's going fast enough and you've got enough momentum, it can do a lot of damage. So was that just a lack of creative thinking? And if you are the expert, maybe you don't know everything. Maybe if you're the expert, you can still learn. The second type of flawed thinking, people said that the current software models showed that minimal to no damage would occur from launch debris. Well, the model that we were using was called Crater. And Crater, although a good model, was never validated by real world testing. So I'm sure many of you work with models, whether you're in college or you're out working. Models are driving decisions all around the country and all around the world. When you work with a model, you need to know, what is your confidence in that model? Has it been used for years and years? Are we always getting good results out of it? Or is this something new? And in the sense of Crater, it was developed through analysis only, and there was no real world data that was ever put into Crater, because at the time, we didn't have any way to do that. So we were making decisions based on analysis. And after the accident, we set up this test article, and we were shooting debris at a shuttle wing, and all of that data was fed back into Crater. So the Crater model is actually a good model, and they used it until the end of the shuttle program to determine if when debris falls, which debris always falls off of launch vehicles, and it hits something, will it be enough damage that we need to be concerned? So Crater actually got better once we put real world test data into it, and we tweaked it, but we kept the same model. So be cautious with using models. Know your confidence in them. The third type of flawed thinking, people said, well, it's never happened before, so it can't happen now. Well, this was the 113th launch of the space shuttle, so for 112 flights, we haven't had a problem, so why should we have a problem now? Well, that is a type of flawed thinking. And if you go back to the Challenger accident, which was the other fatal accident, there were 2 fatal accidents in the space shuttle program. And if you go back to Challenger, many of you may remember that the Challenger blew up on launch because the O-rings in the solid rocket boosters were not containing the hot gases. And in the case of Challenger, when the hot gas was passing out through the O-ring, it went straight towards the fuel tank, and it was like a blowtorch, and that went into the fuel tank and caused it to explode. Well, in the case of Challenger, the engineers knew that many launches before Challenger, we were having blow-throughs on those O-rings, but they were going in other directions away from the fuel tank. So we had those messages which were ignored and ended up with an accident. And then after the Challenger accident, an author named Diane Vaughan wrote a book. It's called The Challenger Launch Decision. It's a very interesting book. And Diane Vaughan is a sociologist. She's not an engineer. But in her book, she coined a term called normalization of deviance. So the deviance was the O-rings were being bypassed by this hot gas. But NASA thought, even though it wasn't designed to happen that way, NASA thought, well, that's what's happening, so it must be okay. The normalization of deviance. Well, in the case of Columbia, it was the foam falling off the tank, and we were not supposed to have large pieces of foam falling off the fuel tank, but it was. And over all those years, the problem was never fixed. And if you fly enough times, eventually one of those big pieces of foam is going to hit in a critical area, and it did. So I would say the type of flawed thinking is when you say, well, it's never happened before, so must be okay. It's not true. The fourth type of flawed thinking, a top manager said in a press conference after the accident, a top manager said, if we knew there was a hole in the wing, there's nothing we could have done. And you got to be careful about ever saying that, because you may be wrong. Because the accident board determined, yes, there was something that could have been done. A rescue mission could have been launched. So was that just a lack of creative thinking on the part of our leadership? I don't know, but I will say that if you are the person who is making the decision and you find yourself in a very tough corner like they did during the Columbia mission, talk to your people. because you will be very surprised at how creative they will be, and how many, especially if there's maybe people's lives are at risk, or maybe your entire mission is at risk. You will be amazed at the great ideas that they come up with. And you will be even amazed at yourself in the great ideas that you will come up with when you have to. So you got to be careful ever saying there's nothing that could have been done. Just give it a try. And then the fifth and final type of flawed thinking that I believe contributed to the accident was, if you can't stand the answer, don't ask the question. So we've all heard that phrase before. And I think what was going on is many people in the chain of command were thinking, well, I really can't stand the answer if I see there's damage up there. So let's just not take the pictures so we don't know. And because we don't have a plan for this. And I really think that that we just don't want to operate that way. And I think that these 5 types of flawed thinking, and there's more, but they not only apply to the way we fly our space missions, but they apply to anywhere you work, and it even applies to your everyday life. So I think those are good things to think about if you're interested in learning more about what happened during the Columbia accident. You can find the it's called the CAIB report, CAIB, Columbia Accident Investigation Board report, and you can find it online. So I'm going to, in a couple of minutes here, I want to show a video of the mission that we eventually flew, but I just want to talk about one other thing in the type of flawed thinking: being a better listener, going out and asking your people questions. How are things going here? What can we do better? Does this idea make sense to you? It's important to be a better listener. The other factor is being humble, humility. And a lot of people misinterpret what humility is. It's not being quiet and shy and maybe sitting in the corner. No, humility, I believe, is a sense of confident humility, where you are willing to give other people's ideas a chance, and you're not being arrogant. You don't feel like you're being threatened, but you feel like you want teamwork. But yet, if you're the leader, you're still in control. You don't feel threatened, but you feel the teamwork, and you're bringing your team together. So I think of it as a confident humility, which is tied to being a good listener. And the last one is creativity. And I've already talked about that, but being able to think creatively, challenging your people to come up with new ideas. And even when you go to work every day you should be asking, how can we do this better? Is there anything here that can hurt us? Is there anything here that can make us fail? Is there a solution to this? And thinking creatively day to day, which is a little bit different from innovation. You know, innovation, I think, is when you're assigned a job to go out and come up with a new way of doing things. And one of the things you'll see in the video that I'm going to show is the result of one of those innovative ideas. So before we could fly the space shuttle again, we had to solve 3 major problems. One was to stop foam from falling off the fuel tank. The second was to be able to do repair. If we see any damage on the shuttle in orbit, how could we repair, a hole or maybe a missing tile? And then the third thing was to inspect. Like, how do we know that we have a hole? I mentioned that the Columbia crew couldn't see the hole. They didn't have a robot arm. So we not only flew a robot arm on our flight, but we flew an extension to the robot arm. And we added 3 cameras of different types of sensing equipment to the end of that arm to help. And we actually did a survey of the whole outside of the shuttle. But the idea that I want to mention is on the rendezvous. So I was in a meeting, and a new idea was being presented. So the way the rendezvous is flown in the space shuttle, let's say you've got the space station up here, and the space shuttle comes up from below. And then we normally fly out in front and come in and dock. Well, the idea that was presented is when you come up from below, it's called an R-bar approach or radius vector approach. You stop at 600 feet, pause, and flip the shuttle around 360 degrees so the crew on the space station can photograph the underside of the shuttle in areas that we normally can't see. So that idea was presented in a meeting, and I was there, and it was funny because of other people sitting in the meeting were saying, oh, you can't do that. And they were coming up with ideas why you couldn't do it. I remember one of them was, you can't lose sight. There's a flight rule that says the crew can't lose sight. And if you flip, you're going to lose sight. And then we thought, well, we wrote the flight rule, we can make an exception to it. And we did. And it was a great idea. It wasn't my idea. And sometimes we have a resistance. Oh, it wasn't my idea. I wish it was. But I credit the engineers for being creative, but we got together with them as a crew and we developed this procedure and we flew it on our mission. And every space shuttle flight after mine till the end of the program that went to the space station flew that maneuver. It's called the RPM, Rendezvous Pitch Around Maneuver. So having said that, let's go ahead and roll the video. It runs about 8 minutes and I'm gonna narrate it. And so this video starts with launch day. And let's see. Okay, here we go. So that's Jim Kelly with me as we're walking out about 4 hours before launch. We get on that old bus there. It's called the Astro Van. It was around at the Apollo days. It has since been retired. So we're in the shuttle. We lay there for about 3 hours on our back, running procedures and watching the launch countdown. And here's the main engine start. There's liftoff. We had something like 70 cameras around the launch pad and on the shuttle. So the next view you're going to see is from a camera that is on the solid rocket boosters, looking down at the shuttle. So on the bottom is the orange fuel tank. The top is the shuttle. You can see the tiles. You can actually see the beach in the background in the ocean and the solid rocket, the white boosters on the side there. So this is a view at 2.5 minutes when the boosters separate. So we're continuing to go up in the fuel tank and those boosters come down. And as you know, they were reusable. They were reused for the entire 30 years of the shuttle program. You can see the burnout there in the debris. So this is 8.5 minutes. The main engine's cut off and we go up there at the top and the fuel tank crashes down into the Indian Ocean. So I think this is flight day 2 and I am flying a series of burns. We're catching up with the space station, which we rendezvoused and docked on flight day 3. That's Charlie Camarda on the left side there, looking over my shoulder. This is the RPM, Rendezvous Pitch Around Maneuver. It sped up a little bit, but during this maneuver, they actually photographed some gap fillers that popped out between the tiles. And you'll see that later. This is a slower version. This is from the shuttle looking at the space station. You can see the orange solar arrays, those silver radiators. You can see the Soyuz at the bottom. That was the station when it was halfway built. Okay, I'm on the left there in the pink shirt. If you look out over my head, that's where all those rendezvous and dockings were flown manually by the commander in the space shuttle program. So a couple hours later, we opened the hatch. That's Sergei Krikalev on the other side, the Russian commander of the space station. He's a good friend of mine for many, many years. It was great to see him again in space. On the right side there in the light blue is John Phillips. Okay, in the middle is Andy Thomas in the dark shirt. So the dark shirts were the shuttle crew and the light blue is the station crew. That's Wendy Lawrence in the front. Here comes Jim Kelly, my pilot. And they were very happy to see us. They had been up there without, Sergey and John had been up there without supplies for quite some time. And I don't know if they were happy to see us. I think they just wanted their coffee and their food and they wanted more experiments so they had something to do. So we were busy. We were docked for, I think, about 7 days. There's Andy and Wendy doing a transfer. They're in the US laboratory. This is Soichi Noguchi from Japan. And in the back is Steve Robinson, who was our flight engineer. Those two went out on their very first spacewalk. Wendy and Jim here are operating the robot arm. You cannot actually see the robot arm when you operate it. You use those monitors, laptops, and cameras. You can see that we call it the Canada arm there in the middle. Okay, here's Soichi and Steve in the shuttle airlock. They're getting ready to go out on their spacewalk. So that takes many hours to get suited up. And you close the inner hatch, you evacuate the airlock, and then you open the outer hatch and out they go. This is video on the right side of one of the crew members at the airlock on the space station. So we used both the shuttle and the station airlocks in the 3 spacewalks that we did. So I'm going to talk about the first spacewalk. We tested techniques for repairing a shuttle in the future. The second spacewalk was a change out of a gyroscope. So the space station has 4 what are called CMGs, or control moment gyroscopes. Well, one of them had failed catastrophically about over a year prior to our flight. So we took up a new gyroscope and we removed and replaced the old one. And the way we did that, now these gyroscopes weigh 600 pounds on Earth, but in space they're weightless. So Soichi was on the robot arm and he actually carried, there it is on the right side. You see that big black kind of cylinder shaped object? That was effortless for him to hold that. 600 pounds on Earth by weight, but it has, in space, it still has mass, but it has no weight in space. Its weight in space is 0, although its mass is still 600. So he was able to hold that, and you can see him over there, look at a little bit left of center. Wendy flew him on the robot arm over to the station for 45 minutes and then back with the old one. This is our third spacewalk. This is Steve now on the end of the robot arm, and he is underneath the shuttle. And with his hands, he removed these gap fillers that had popped out. So they saw in the RPM maneuver in the photos that a couple of these gap fillers popped out. That red is the glue that failed. And we removed 2 of those. The engineers are worried that when we came back home, the airstream might blow those gap fillers and take some tiles with them and cause a breach in our heat shield. So we removed the gap fillers. This is a view of them that my EVA crew showed to the ground later. And by the way, they fixed there was nothing wrong with the glue. They just fixed the process and never had that problem again. This is, I think, flight day 12, where we said goodbye to the space station crew and closed the hatch. We did our separation. Jim Kelly flew the fly around. This is a view from above of the ISS. You can see the solar arrays, and I like to tell people the station is completely powered by solar, and it's has quite a bit of power too. They usually don't have trouble getting electrons and getting enough electricity. So here's the crew looking out the window. Charlie Camarda's in the background with a laser. It's a handheld laser that gives you range and range rate. Okay, this is one of the burns. We did several small burns. Anything that's not, if it's not Velcro down, it's going to get jostled around a little bit. This purpose here was to show my kids our sleeping bags in space. Okay, we're coming home. You can see out the window the plasma that develops outside the shuttle. This is an infrared view from the ground at Edwards Air Force Base, and you can see the heat on the shuttle as we're coming home. As I mentioned, we slow down from Mach 25. The crew takes over and flies from right above the base as soon as we go subsonic. We're coming down final there. You can see how hot the nose gets. And we're about 7 times steeper than a commercial airliner, and we land almost twice as fast as a commercial airliner. Therefore we have the drag chute. It slows us down. It gives us lateral stability as we roll out on the runway. So our landing took place right before sunrise at about 5 something in the morning. And we changed out of our orange pressure suits. They get pretty heavy when you come back. If the crew wants to do a walk around, in which we did, take a look at the outside of the shuttle. We wanted to, in particular, look at our heat shield, which was in great shape. And it takes a while for us as crew members to readapt to being back on Earth's gravity. And as some astronauts say, when you come back, there's a gravity storm going on, and it takes days for even weeks for us to get readapted to being on Earth. So I'm just going to make a little closing statement, and so we'll have time. We should have about 15 minutes here to ask questions, but I want to make a closing statement while you, by the way, you can all ask me anything. I'll try my best to answer your questions, and I always say, you can't ask me anything I haven't been asked before, but that's not true because I'm always, believe it or not, hearing new questions. So my closing statement is, I just want to talk about, so the space shuttle was retired 10 years ago, but it flew 18 times after the accident. And the space shuttle built the space station along with the Russians and their Soyuz and our international partners. But the space shuttle was an essential part of building that space station. And a lot of people will say, well, the shuttle just for 30 years, it just flew around the Earth. Well, the shuttle did many things. It launched the Hubble Space Telescope and repaired it. It not only built the space station, but we have so much data from the human body in space, from those trips back and forth to the space station. Because for us to go on to the moon, to go on to Mars as humans, and to live there and live there safely, we need all that data from the station, not only on the human body, but on the technologies there. How does the solar power work? We're recycling water, we're generating oxygen, we're taking carbon dioxide out of the air. That technical equipment breaks down. And over time, we have learned how to design better, how to fix it when it breaks down, but also how to design better equipment that we can use when we're even farther away. We don't want to put astronauts at risk on the moon, and especially at Mars, when you're at least 6 months away, travel time from Earth. So the space station was, I just want to say a few words. It was a cooperative between many countries. It was an international project. It's still flying. It's really a flagship for how humans can cooperate in space internationally. We're also learning more about planet Earth, learning more about the human body and the universe that we live in. So the model for human spaceflight today is changing. So in the past, it was countries, and it's going to companies now. So it's changing from countries owning the launch vehicles, the orbital vehicles, and the launch sites, to private companies owning the launch vehicles, the orbital vehicles, and the ground facilities. And this is a very growing industry as private companies realize that there is a profit that can be made from the space business. But I believe we must do it safely. And I say the reason I still talk about the Columbia accident is so many new companies are coming into space. They have also got to know the lessons learned from the space shuttle program, because we don't want to see the same mistakes made over again. And it's just critical that we learn from our history. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some of my comments. I just want to say one thing about the environment of space. So we live on planet Earth today. We're like tiny little dots on the surface. And as the Earth turns, as the Earth rotates and revolves around the sun, the only thing keeping us on the surface is gravity. And the only thing keeping us safe is this very tiny little atmosphere. It's almost like an eggshell on an egg that has the air that we breathe. And then we have, fortunately, like the Van Allen belts and other natural protection from the radiation of outer space. And when we leave planet Earth, we go out into this new environment that's full of all kinds of risks that need to be protected. And that is what we're doing at NASA, is studying those risks and doing our best to make space flight safer. So I believe the future is full of opportunities, and I want to thank you all for your interest. And I can see, I've looked at your agenda and I see what you're doing these couple of days in your conference, and I applaud you for what you're studying, what you're learning, and for your interest in space. And thank you for the opportunity to share my experiences with you. So having said that, I want to hear what your questions are. I'll try to keep my answers short so we can get as many questions in as possible. And I think I'll either turn it back over to Vernon or to Daniel.
So Colonel Collins, I have a couple of questions here. And if you would like to, on the right-hand side of your screen at the bottom, there's a Q&A, and you can put a question there. The first one, Colonel Collins, is I wonder, from Mike Rand, I wonder what you think about how people can reach a balance between listening to lay people versus deferring to the experts, especially at a time when anti-science sentiments are running high in regards to the current pandemic.
So great question, because, I just talked about listening. And one of the things that I learned, so I think back even before the Columbia accident, I was very filtering in what I listened to. And I thought someone would say something and I'm like, that's crazy, and I just, let's go back to how we always do it. But the Columbia accident really changed me. I listen to everybody now. And that's hard because it takes time. And sometimes it's uncomfortable because you don't like to hear what somebody's saying. Maybe you don't agree with it, but it's very important that we listen to everything. And as a leader, you can't possibly use everyone's idea. It's just not possible, but it's important that people know that you listen to what they said. Now, if you're just reading something, maybe you're online and maybe you're on social media. I'm very careful about criticizing people. I've been criticized online and, that's okay. That's fine. I mean, people can say what they want to say, but I think that you always should have a caveat. Like say, well, that's not going to work because, maybe this is a better idea. I think we can politely criticize people, but, and you also mentioned the pandemic. So yeah, there's a lot of different ideas going on out there about the pandemic. So I'm listening to all of them. And I want to say I'm cautiously listening, and maybe some in the end, when years later we look back, we're going to say, well, that was true and that wasn't, or maybe all of it was true, but maybe in a different form. So I think it's very important that we listen, that we have, I want to say, use the word wisdom, because you are not going to get wisdom if you don't listen. Over the years, that's something I've learned. And I think wisdom is an important goal for each of us. So thanks for the question.
Another question here is, do you think the commercial sector is less risk averse than NASA or other governmental organizations?
Yeah. So another great question. So I think about this question every day. I'm an advisor for the National Space Council, and I do some other, board work. I'm on the board of the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. So, we memorialize the astronauts who lost their lives in spaceflight. So we don't want to see another accident. We do not want to put any more names in the memorial. So, we talk to these private companies, and I know that they don't want to have an accident, because if they do, or if they lose a life or several lives, they're going to go full stop. Their business is over. And it may take 2.5 years for them to get flying again, like it did with the shuttle, but they may never fly again. So I think that they are being very careful. Now, I'm not working with them every day, but I think that they know they have to fly safely. So now, as far as them being risk averse, I can't really get into their to speak for them. I can only speak for what I see from where I sit. But I am hoping that all of these companies that are flying humans in space are very successful. I pray they never have an accident. And I pray that they try not to go too fast. I mean, you got to try to go fast, but as soon as you see, hey, I've got an engineer over here who says we shouldn't fly because this thing is going to cause an accident, you've got to stop and look at that and listen. So no, I don't think I have a complete answer to your question, but I think that's the best I can answer it. Thank you. I think I might have lost my
Vernon,
sound.
you are
sorry.
okay.
Do you believe that with the burgeoning new space industry, we will see new space vessels that are similar to Columbia? Also, are they going too fast with their attempts with exploration?
Yeah, so I don't know how to answer the first half of your question. I'd be purely speculating, but do I think they're going too fast? No, I do not. at this point. But I think they, as I answered in my last question, I think that you can be lured into going too fast. And you've got to be careful there because, like I said, you've got to listen to your engineers and the experts on the systems when they say, hey, we got a problem here. We don't want to fly this. But as far as going too fast, you go all the way back to 2006 or 2007, when NASA first decided that they were going to use commercial companies to take cargo to the space station. And several companies came in, as you know, SpaceX and Boeing, Sierra Nevada. I could mention several others, but they came in and we want to be part of making this happen. And then they said, well, someday we think we'd like to launch people. Well, that was 14 years ago. So I don't think it's going too fast. If anything, it probably, you think, well, maybe it should go faster. But the reason it hasn't is safety. So the commercial companies know that they need to be safe. They know they can't have an accident. And then, of course, NASA's looking over their shoulder, because if NASA is going, we are putting our astronauts on their launch vehicles. So back in the old days, like with the shuttle, we put NASA astronauts on NASA launch vehicles. Now we're putting NASA astronauts on, like, for example, SpaceX launch vehicles. So we're a customer. It's not like we own the car. It's like we have a rental car, or we have an Uber, or we have a taxi. So that's the change in the model. It's more, I'd say it's more of a financial change in the model. Operationally, it's still pretty similar from the astronauts' point of view. As far as how we do the operations, the astronauts still have to, work with the company and study all the systems. And I will say the biggest change is its automation, because the shuttle, we flew the space shuttle. I mean, we hand flew in orbit. We hand flew the rendezvous and the docking. We hand flew the landings. I mean, I had to train as a test pilot to fly the final approach and to fly the landing. And we did that in a Gulfstream 2 that was modified to fly like the shuttle. Well, today with technology, these new orbital vehicles and launch vehicles, they're fully automated, and you can fly and not touch anything. And you still need a commander, but I'm not sure you need a pilot. Maybe you need somebody maybe pushing buttons, but you don't really need somebody as a pilot in many of these launch vehicles that can hand fly it. So I think that's really the biggest change from an operational point of view. And it's good to have automation. I mean, it saves gas, it's safer, but if the automation fails, in some cases, the astronaut needs to be ready to take over. So thank you for the question.
A question from Sheila Newman. Did environmental stewardship factor into the development and operation of the space shuttle?
Well, okay, so the shuttle was developed and operated it was developed in the 1970s. And, I was alive in the 1970s, and I know that the environment was a big deal back then, because there was so much pollution back. I mean, I grew up in upstate New York, and there was acid rain, and there was, like, the lakes and the rivers had pollution in them, and it was terrible. So, nobody liked it. So we, the country got that under control. I mean, our air and our lakes and our rivers are much cleaner today than they were in the 70s. Well, the space shuttle was designed, okay, so there's two types of propulsion. There's the boosters, and then there's the main engines. So the boosters were not very environmentally friendly, because the boosters, they're made of solid rocket fuel. And we had there were many chemical ingredients. One of them was aluminum perchlorate, and I don't remember the names of all the others. But when I watched a shuttle launch, you would have something like acid rain come down from the first 2 minutes of that launch, and that's the solids. And people, and you wouldn't want to park your car too close to the launch site, because you could get this, I want to say, byproduct on your car, and it would burn through the paint on your car. So we didn't like that. That solid rocket technology was designed in the 70s, and there's cleaner ways to do it. And the way we got around it in the shuttle program was, well, we only launch like 4 times a year, maybe 5 times. There's some years we didn't launch at all. So because of the small number of launches, it really didn't do any damage to the environment. And by the way, I want to say liquid engines, like in our 3 main engines, the ones that took us from 2 minutes to 8 minutes, that burned oxygen and hydrogen. Cryogenic, meaning very cold, -400 degrees, oxygen oxygen, hydrogen, burned very cleanly. The byproduct was steam. Power, steam was very clean. It did like no pollution at all. So some of the launch vehicles today use methane, not methane. I'm just drawing a blank on what kerosene. I'm sorry, they use kerosene in some of these. The Apollo program used kerosene. So it, kind of depends on the fuel. But, I think that there's going to be more and more and more launches into space. We've got to be cleaner. We don't want to be polluting the environment. And that's, I think, essential in designing rockets going forward. The other big area of pollution, I'm just going to say this once because I want to have time for more questions. The biggest area of pollution is Earth orbit has so much debris in it. It is getting to be, it is a safety issue because some of these pieces of debris are so small, they can hit you, they can hit your satellite, they can hit you on the space station, they can kill you if you are a human up there in space. And we only can track something that's bigger than maybe a baseball or a softball. Anything smaller than that, we can't track it. If it hits you, that's not good. So I would say, if someone asked me the number one problem in space today, I would say orbital debris in space traffic management and knowing what's up there and keeping it all from hitting each other. So I know that wasn't exactly an answer to your question, but I kind of put it in the category of pollution. So, and I'm concerned about it. So thanks for your question.
That's a real concern. Maybe related to that is a question here. In the event of death in orbit, especially on a long-term duration or sojourn to Mars, should we develop burial policies on Mars or should we return the remains to Earth? I don't know if you've had those conversations, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. And we think about the kind of things at NASA. They have been thought about. We thought, what if someone died on the space shuttle? I mean, we actually had body bags on the space shuttle. If someone died, I mean, you would come home, but you had to have a way to take care of that. And now all of us were trained in medical procedures. Now, first of all, the astronauts were screened for health. I mean, the odds of someone having a heart attack on the space shuttle were extremely small because they knew like everything about every test you could possibly think of was done to our hearts. And they weren't going to launch us if we were going to have a problem. And so, very low probability of someone dying, but we want to be prepared in case it happens. Now, if it happens on the moon or on Mars, I would guess, and I don't know the answer to this, but I would guess the astronaut would be asked, what do you want? Do you want your remains to come home or do you want them to be buried? So, I mean, we're asked questions like on the shuttle, obviously they bring us home, but we're asked questions like, if someone in your family, you're up on a mission and someone in your family dies back on Earth, do you want to know that right away? Or do you want to wait until after you land for us to tell you? I mean, they ask us that before we fly. So that's the doctors that ask us that. So our flight surgeons. So they think about a lot of stuff like that. We don't always talk about it, but it's you've got to talk about, like, everybody should have a will. I mean, if you don't have a will, if you're over 18 years old, you should have a will, because like nobody wants to die, but you should be prepared for it just in case.
Fantastic. Well, we are right up to we have one more time, I think, one more question. Given the advent of Space Force and other adversary space programs, do you see the potential for direct combat in space over resources such as the moon, asteroids, or long-range points?
Yeah, well, that's a sad thing to think about. But again, we have to think about that. Yes, it could happen. I mean, if you listen, I mean, just this week, the Air Force was holding the Air Force Space Force together, having their conference. And that was a theme that was talked about over and over again. We don't want to see war in space. In fact, the Outer Space Treaty prevents us from putting like weapons of mass destruction into space. But we still have satellites up there. And could one satellite hit another satellite, or could a laser hit another satellite, or could some kind of electromagnetic energy take out the satellite? I mean, you could go on and on. So there is potential, I would say, for war in space, maybe in a wholly new way of thinking of war. But because we have assets up there they need to be protected. So that's a good question, and maybe better asked to someone who's active duty military today. I read the news, and that's about I read the news every day, so that's about all I know. But that is a very important question that you asked, and we need to, as a country, we need to, in every country should stay on top of that and respect. We need to respect each other's assets in space and not appear to be threatening each other. And space should be a peaceful place. It is, and we want to keep it that way.
Wonderful. Well, Colonel Collins, we cannot thank you enough for taking your time and sharing your key leadership insights that are, I think, key and applicable to so many situations in life. We really appreciate your insights and your time and your effort. And thank you so much for your service as well, and the continued service that you provide as a leader and exemplar in the world. So we thank you for your time and appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. It's been great to be with you. Everybody have a great conference.